Do you watch porn? Do you watch it enough that you think you might have an addiction to it? Maybe you just like to watch it from time to time for the fun of it. Today, we will be talking with an expert who is a recovering porn addict right here on The Father Show. Don't go away. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We got a fantastic show for you today. Today, I have Joshua Shea, and he is a recovering porn addict and alcoholic with over 6 years of sobriety behind him. He has written 2 books, operates a pornographic addiction resource website, and has contributed to publications like thefix.com and Recovery Today magazine. He also has appeared on over 100 podcasts and radio TV shows and has developed a presentation about pornographic addiction for libraries, churches, and other groups. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Joshua. Hey, Joshua, how you doing?
Hi. Good, Mike. Thank you for having me on your show today. I appreciate it.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. Thank you for being here on the show. It's a pleasure having you. It's good to have an expert to talk about something that is very sensitive, very needed, and I think a lot of people have that problem but don't really want to admit it or don't know how to
Right.
come about it. So I think it's an important subject for us to talk about as men and really for our families as a whole. We need to get a grip on whether we have it or not, or is it okay or not, to even watch porn. So I thank you for being here on the show today. And since we only have a short period of time, let's kind of dive right into it. So, what is porn?
Well, for my definition, I think porn is one of two things. First, we can all agree on the first definition. It's that stuff that's triple X that you used to find at the back of the video store. That's very explicit sex. That there's no question whether it's porn or not. The
Mm-hmm.
second is a little bit more of a gray area, and to me, that is any material that can be used for sexual gratification purposes. That can be a Victoria's Secret catalog. That can be, pictures of girls in bikinis. It can be whatever the end user needs it to be. To me, pornography ultimately is about the intent of the user. And if it's intended to be used for sexual gratification, then it can absolutely be clarified or quantified as pornography.
Right, because in this world, we know everything is sold by sex, really.
Right.
So anything and everything we look at from babies on up, don't you think is programmed in our minds? Sexuality, sex is something we see on a visual. We even known that some Disney movies have a little tidbit of sex in it. The kid might not recognize, maybe it's for the parent,
Right.
but it's still there and it's still going to be going in that kid's brain.
Well, I mean, sexuality is something that we're all born with, that we've had since we've been able to get off 4 legs and step onto two of them. You can go back to ancient cavemen times, and you'll see pornography on the walls of caves where they painted. Or you go look at ancient Egypt or ancient Phoenicia and some of their artwork. I saw a vase at a museum that had some of the most pornographic images you could imagine on it. So it's not like this stuff is brand new. I think it's just that somebody 50, 60 years ago who worked at an ad agency, as the standards for what was allowed in public started to ease up and has eased up over time, recognized that this fascination we have towards sexuality can move products. But it's nothing that's new. It's being used as a sales tool over the last 60, 70 years for the first time.
Yeah, and I would think that, and needless to say, I'm not a psychologist, so, but anything can be addictive if you do it too much. Whether that's eating food, drinking alcohol, like you said, watching porn, or anything in the world that, drinking water, you can get addicted. It's just too much. So, wouldn't you say?
Well, there were a lot of people who asked me, what is it like being an addict? Because I've got the porn addiction and the alcohol addiction in my background, and I tell them, especially if they're under 30 years old, if you want to run a little experiment when it comes to addiction, when you wake up tomorrow morning, take your telephone and turn it all the volume all the way up. Then take a post-it note and put it across the screen, and then just put it there next to you. And when you hear that first little ding or chime, whether it's a text or somebody likes a photo or it's a Snapchat, or even if the phone rings, uh, don't answer it. Don't answer it. And then the second time it does that, don't answer it. And the third time it does that, don't answer it. And by the fourth or fifth time, most people I know who have tried this experiment are absolutely jonesing to look at their phone. Because when the phone does one of those little chimes, when somebody wants something or wants to reinforce something you put out there,
Hmm.
that's like a hit of dopamine. And addiction is really about scratching the pleasure centers in your brain. Like you said, it doesn't matter what the substance is, it's about scratching the pleasure centers of your brain. And I think most people these days don't even recognize how addicted to their phones they are. And you can
Yeah, real.
understand addiction when you run this little experiment and try not to look at your phone, even though you can hear things are happening. That's kind of the way it
Yeah.
is, when I was a porn addict or an alcoholic, was that there's just that little dinging, there's just that little itch, there's just that little piece of me that's saying, go look at the porn, go look at the porn, or go take a drink, go take a drink. Much like a lot of people have, look at the phone, look at the phone.
Yeah. Now, did or can an addiction to porn um, affect your love life?
Absolutely. And a lot of people, especially a lot of partners, and I wrote my second book specifically for partners of porn addicts, a lot of them blame themselves or wonder what's wrong with them when their partner ends up being a pornography addict because they see a great drop in their sex lives.
Hmm.
And the reality is, it's not specifically always the pornography that causes that drop. If you look at heroin addicts, alcoholics, food addicts, gambling addicts, across the board, normal sexuality usually drops for any type of addict. But because this is a porn addict, because it involves looking at people having sex, because it involves naked people, there's such a close correlation between a porn addict and not satisfying or not being there for the partner in the bedroom, when
Hmm.
most of it actually has to do with addiction. What's ironic is that the people who may not have a porn addiction but just enjoy watching it recreationally, you'll find actually more of them use pornography as a substitute for sex than people who are fully addicted. When I was addicted, I still had relations with my wife, and because I wasn't using pornography as a substitute for sex, I wasn't using pornography as a substitute for physical intimacy. My needs for pornography, much like my needs for alcohol, went far deeper. They went to talk about and help quell childhood trauma that I didn't even recognize I had most of the time. Addiction is really not about a substance or a behavior. Addiction is usually a symptom of a much deeper problem, a much deeper behavior, a much deeper incident that happened. For instance, with porn addicts, 90 to 94%, depending on which study you look at, have to do with trauma happening in youth, usually emotional trauma, sometimes or quite often also sexual trauma, sometimes physical trauma. But that's what's at the root of most addictions. It's I always try to tell the partners, it's not about you. I was a porn addict for 11 or 12 years before I ever met my wife. She had nothing to do with it. She had nothing to do with it getting worse. It was all on me. I didn't get help for it until well after we were married. But it wasn't that she wasn't enough in the bedroom. It wasn't that she did anything wrong. It was that I didn't seek help for a problem. Granted, a problem that I didn't realize I had for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I ultimately really want these partners to understand, while it can affect your love life, it is not your fault.
Yeah. Now, how did your wife handle finding out about your addiction?
She knew that I had looked at pornography from time to time. She was not a real prude about it, but she had no idea the amount of time that I looked at it. She had no idea that I had made a transition over from just looking at porn on a screen to actually going into chat rooms. It
Mm-hmm.
was, it was one of those things that hit her, and like it hits partners, and what most partners feel is what's called betrayal trauma, because suddenly this guy who you thought you knew, who you loved, you begin to, well, if he hid this from me for so long, he hid this very important, private secret for so long, what else don't I know about him?
Yeah.
What else has he been lying to me about? So, pornography addiction and sex addiction, they actually hit the partners much harder than the partners of a lot of other addictions. A heroin addict's girlfriend doesn't say, "Am I not enough in the bedroom?" Or, a gambling addict's wife doesn't say, "Well, what did I do wrong to drive him to the casino?"
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to a porn or sex addict's partner, like we just said, they often wonder what they did wrong when the answer is absolutely nothing. And they usually need to get some therapy and to go through a mourning period and a rebuilding of trust period. And
Yeah.
my wife absolutely had to go through that.
Yeah. So, what made you decide to get help for your addiction?
It was the police showing up at my door.
Really?
Like I said, yeah, I made the transition over to chat rooms
Mm-hmm.
where for the last 2 or 3 months of my addiction, which lasted about 25 years, and I would talk to women in the middle of the night when I was having insomnia, usually drunk at the time. Um, I couldn't sleep because I was having a lot of issues at work. I pulled myself off of my bipolar medication, and I hoped that that would give me energy, make me feel more creative. And all it did was sink me much worse into my addictions.
Mm.
I would speak to women at night. I would try to encourage them to, take off their clothes or do something sexually. And in very early 2014, the Maine State Police showed up at my door and told me that one of those girls that I talked to was a teenager.
Ooh.
And they came inside the house because when you have a search warrant, you let the police in. And they laid out their case for me right then and there, and they had me. I couldn't say it. They didn't have me. I didn't know at the time that she was a teenager, but I did know at the time that there were 16-year-olds who look 26 and 26-year-olds who look 16. And it really was the wake up call that I absolutely needed. I ended up serving 6 months in jail, and rightfully so. You can't do that and get away with it. And to trade 6 months of my life for the recovery that I've been through, for all the learning that I've done, for being able to write these books and give back, I'll take that any day of the week. When those police showed up at my door, I knew my life was forever changed. but it didn't take me much more than 2 or 3 minutes to know that my life was going to be forever changed for the good.
Yeah.
As almost cheesy as it sounds, they were really like angels banging at my door. And
Yeah.
the police officer, when he brought me to the sheriff's office, I was sitting in the front seat with him, and he said, "You're just about the calmest guy I've ever seen in this situation." And I said, "This has needed to happen. Something had to stop me.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should have driven my car into a house long before that because of how much I'd drank and been behind a wheel. But this is what got me. And thankfully, this saved my life because I tell you, Mike, I only give even odds I'd be here today if there hadn't been some kind of intervention from the police. I don't think my family convened. I think I could have a lot of. I think there were a lot of little things that could have happened that wouldn't have stopped me. But having the police step in, which basically just erased my life as I knew it, saved my life as I knew it. And,
Yeah.
6 years, 7 years later now, I'm a completely different person, and I'm so thankful that happened. I don't minimize what I did. I don't justify what I did. What I did was a horrible, rotten thing. And I was a very sick person. And I got the help that I needed. And now I'm just trying to come on shows like yours and give back and let people know that, for 99.5% of my addictive years, I never would have gone into a chat room. I never would
Mm-hmm.
have lost the sense that I could talk to a teenager, but I got to that point. And if I can get to that point, somebody who owned two businesses, has a wife, two kids, nice house,
Mm-hmm.
if I can get to that point, anybody can. So
Right. Right.
anybody out there listening who thinks, oh, well, this guy went off the deep end, I have a bit of a problem, but not that bad. Well, for 20 plus years, my problem wasn't that bad, but it got to that point. And if it can get to that point with me, it can get to that point with you. So if you have a problem, you need to get some help before you end up as a cautionary tale like I am.
And I agree. So, what was the first step that you took to get the help that you needed?
Well, ironically, the day after I was arrested, I went to see a lawyer who was a friend of my father's, and I brought my wife and my father along with me. And the first question he asked was, "Well, is this a litigation game or is this a sentencing game?" And I said, "No, they got me. I did it. It was a mistake, but I did it. It's a sentencing game." He said, "Okay, well, do you have any problems with drugs or alcohol?" I said, "No, absolutely not." And my wife and my father both stopped right there and said, "He absolutely has a problem with alcohol."
Mm.
And I stopped and looked at them, and my lawyer stopped. He said, "Okay, I see this a lot. You have a problem with alcohol?" I said, "I might drink too much." And my wife and my father said, "No, he drinks way too much. He's drank way too much for 20 years." And my lawyer said, "Okay, we're going to get you some help." And I said, "Okay, fantastic. Let's go to rehab, and hopefully that makes the judge happy." And my lawyer said, "Wait, stop. Someday all of this legal stuff is going to be over. Maybe you'll go to jail for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. Maybe you'll have a long probation. Maybe you won't have any. But someday all of this legal stuff will be over. Do you want to be the same guy?"
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Okay, well, let's get you into some alcohol rehab. That's the first thing we need to do. We'll find out if you have any sex or porn addiction issues later. First thing that you need to do is to get into alcohol rehab." I went out to Southern California. I thought, just like in the movies, I'd be there for about 28 days.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up there for 70 days. And it took about a week, but I realized I was exactly the kind of alcoholic they were talking about. And then about 8 weeks into it, my caseworker introduced me to a colleague of his who was a certified sex addiction therapist off campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I met with this gentleman, and he helped me see that I did have pornography problems. I had pornography problems that went further back than my alcohol problems. And he just started to help me open the door of why they were there. And when I came back to Maine, I worked with a therapist one on one. Then we decided that I should go to a porn and sex rehab in Texas. So I went off to that, and I was there for 7 weeks. So I did a lot of rehabilitative therapy, which was absolutely crucial and absolutely transformative for me in
Yeah.
helping me understand how I got to be who I was then. And understanding who I was then and how I got there, that really helped me stop. with the
Mm-hmm.
porn, with the alcohol, and with the cravings towards it. Because once you understand why you're using, it's a lot easier to stop using.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, because you have to get the underlying problem and fix it.
No, absolutely. And it was one of these things where, in the back of my mind, I always kind of knew that something had happened at a babysitter's house when I was 4, 5, 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And through the hard work of the therapy, I was able to get into some of those memories. And, they are disturbing and make me angry and make me sad. Um, but I was able to figure out what happened, and I was able to figure out that or through the help of the experts, I was able to figure out that I developed my survival skills when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And that's not the age to develop your survival skills. And the survival skills of a 4 year old are not the survival skills that a 34-year-old should have. But mine never evolved because my toughest moment of survival was when I was 4 or 5 years old, just trying to get through day to day at that house. I went to this babysitter when my parents, who were both school teachers, they'd drop me off in the morning at 7, pick me up in the afternoon at 4:30. And before I entered kindergarten or first grade, I went there every day, and I just had to survive. The woman who took care of me, she was very ill. I can look back on now,
Wow.
not to excuse her and some of the things she did to me or other children,
Yeah.
but
So
it, you
she did
know
it to
I
more. She more than just you.
I remember incidences with other children, and I remember incidences with my younger brother, and thankfully he doesn't remember them. He we
Mm-hmm.
both we left the house. I think I was 6 or 7, so he must have been about 4 years old. And I've talked to him very superficially about it. As, do you remember what happened at this person's house? And he's like, no, I don't remember this or I don't remember that. And I remember a few things that happened to him that I'm actually not sharing with him because he does not have the same issues that I have with addiction, with mental health, and I don't want to unlock those doors if he doesn't need me to. And he's
Yeah.
said, "No, I'm okay. I don't need to know." And my therapist Steve's even said, I've remembered about 12 to 14 different incidences, and my therapist has said, there's probably 30, 40, 50 there. There's no reason to keep digging. We know what
Mm-hmm.
happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you build your or rebuild your relationship with your wife?
Slowly, and that's all you can do is I made the commitment to her that I was going to try to get better. It's not like I was a wonderful husband or a wonderful father leading into this. After I pulled myself off of my bipolar medication, I became more like a roommate to her than anything else. I was somebody who paid half the bills, but really just was checked out even when I was here, because I had a failing business and I was doing everything I could to save it. A few years earlier, that business was on top of the world. I was also a city councilor in my town here in Maine. So I was very busy and I was not the attentive husband, the attentive father that I should have been. And after all this happened and all this other crap was removed from my life, all I had was my family. And I made the decision that I was going to redouble my efforts to be the father and the husband that they deserved. I told them that. I told them to hold me to it. And then, like about a week and a half after I was arrested, I went to the first rehab and I came back and hit the therapy hard. My wife saw me doing the hard work and
Mm-hmm.
she could see the changes within me. I think if I had not treated it seriously, if I had just been like, okay, well, I'll go do my jail time or whatever, she would have left. Absolutely. And she should have left if I treated it that way.
Yeah.
But I recognized it, even before I saw, my first therapist or went to my first rehab, I knew that I had a problem and I needed something to come through and just shake me and wake me up. And thankfully that did. When that did happen, thankfully I had enough sense to not deny that I had a problem anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully I had enough sense to embrace the opportunity of rehab. And like I said, it took me about a week of being there before I said, I think they're talking about me. I think I'm exactly the person they're talking about here. I should stop thinking that this is about the other people and I'm just here to get a certificate to make a judge happy, because my
Yeah.
lawyer was right. I needed some fundamental changes in my life, and early recovery was hard. It's tough. It's a lot of changing who you are, changing your beliefs, changing your behaviors, changing your patterns,
Hmm.
and it's tough. And I can see why a lot of people do relapse. Thankfully, I never did off porn or alcohol, but it's understandable why people do. And recovery is a tough process.
Yes, it
Here I
is.
am six
Yeah.
years, 6 years later, I still go to the therapist every week, and I do shows like yours. A lot of it, me being here with you, that's part of my recovery, is
Hmm.
spreading the news about pornography addiction and trying to educate people that it's not only a real thing, it's a real thing that's happening in droves that nobody wants to talk about. And we have to start, because while it's hitting guys my age, your age, who grew up on magazines or videotapes, it's hitting the younger generation who has access to the internet and now doesn't remember a world before the internet.
Yeah.
It's hitting them in numbers that we've never seen
And
before.
they have more access to it. You have your computer, you got your phone. You can watch, if you're an addict or a porn addict, you can watch porn anywhere.
This we give every 10-year-old is the
Right.
greatest porn computer in the history of the world. And we give it to 10-year-old kids and send them
Yeah.
off to school, and we don't educate them. And that's part of my message is, I'm sorry this is the way it is in 2020 with everything else that we have to deal with that's out there,
Hmm.
but we have to now educate our children about pornography the way that we do about drugs or alcohol or cigarettes, the way that we teach them to cross the street the right way
Hmm.
or not to be in a swimming pool when nobody else is around. Pornography is just something in today's world that we do need to address. It doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be graphic. Kids are looking for direction, and without direction from their parents, they'll look to their friends. So we
Right.
need to start talking to our kids about pornography from an early age.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you a quick question. How did
Sure.
your mother feel or react when she found out that you had a porn addiction?
I think even to this day, there's a lot of denial going on inside of her. And she grew up French Catholic in Maine, where you didn't talk about your feelings no matter what they were. Everybody could be depressed, or, the crazy person in your family just lived upstairs and nobody talked about it. She's not a big feelings person. She was also raised to believe that sex was a dirty, bad thing. That's what they taught in the Catholic schools back in the early 1950s. So I think that she has come to terms with, in the abstract, that I had a problem with this stuff that she finds repugnant. But I think she's kind of just put that off to the side. She has not read either of my books. I'm positive she's never been on my website. I know she will never see this show that you and I are doing because she's never watched any of them. And that's how she deals with it.
Yeah.
And that's fine with me. My dad has read both my books. My dad, I went on a vacation with him last year. We traveled across the country, and he listened to 3 or 4 podcasts that I'd been on. So everybody reacts differently. It's similar to my kids. The day that my first book came out, my son, who was 15 when it came out, he read it the first day. My
Mm-hmm.
daughter was 18 when it came out. She's 20 now. She still hasn't read it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they deal. And I did this horrible stupid thing. I know that I put some permanent scars or permanent changes into their life, and hopefully it doesn't affect their psyches too much as they get older. I think that I've made up a fair amount of the time that I was a horrible father, prior to all this happening. But they have to deal with it in their own ways, and I'm here to answer questions and I'm here to be supportive. But that's one of those penances that I just have to live with, is that I wreaked a lot of havoc on my family.
Yeah.
It's not just that 16-year-old girl who's out there that I took advantage of that evening on the computer. I did a lot of damage to the people closest to me.
Yeah. So, what would you tell another father that might be experiencing the same thing. He's addicted
Yeah,
to porn. And
I would say you need to get some help. You need to get some help because it is affecting your parenting. It is affecting who you are. Um, the definition of addiction, no matter what kind of addiction, is basically a repeated behavior that consumes you and that you can't stop despite knowing there are negative effects. Now, what are these negative effects? Maybe you're not spending as much time with your kid. Maybe you don't pick him up from school because you have to work because you were busy looking at porn earlier. Maybe you're not putting him to bed because you want to look at porn. Maybe you hear him crying upstairs or her crying upstairs and you don't deal with it because you're looking at porn and you leave it to your wife or your girlfriend. uh, it's not going to make you a better person. Addiction is never going to make you a better person. You're not going to be a better father, husband, co-worker, boss, son. No matter what it is, addiction takes you over. Addiction is what runs your life. And addicts by nature are very secretive. We lie to get what we want. We manipulate to get what we want. We gaslight people. We exhibit behaviors that aren't healthy because the addiction is driving us. And when the addiction is driving you, you cannot be fully there as a parent. So if you believe you have any issues with pornography, you must take care of it. You must go to get some professional help or to a 12-step group, or just get online and go to a forum or a bulletin board that has guys talking about this and learn a little bit more about it. It's important because it will affect who you are, and I guarantee you that your kids will grow up with some kind of skewed view of sexuality, much like I unfortunately did.
yeah, I agree with you, and that's great that you're telling these men and people about your addiction. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today to help and tell your story, being a little transparent, so that other fathers and mothers as well can get a grip and understand what it is to be addicted and have a porn addiction, and know the cause that it can blame. Because we all know with an addiction, the only way to even take the first step is admitting that you have a problem.
Right.
So until you do that, none of it matters. Anybody can talk to you until they're blue in the face, and you're not going to change until you want to change.
And it was interesting. One of the things that pushed me to write my book was when I was in jail talking to a lot of my fellow inmates. A lot of them had porn and sex issues. They found them more embarrassing than their drug issues, than their domestic violence issues, than their burglary or robbery issues. They were embarrassed with their sex and porn issues, despite being criminals in other ways. And that's what really woke me up and made me realize we need to talk about this. If we can't even talk about pornography, and it doesn't have to be graphic, but if
Yeah,
we don't even talk about pornography, how are we going to talk about pornography addiction? We have to accept that statistics tell us that two-thirds of men under 50 years old look at pornography at least monthly. The numbers of women is growing like crazy. The porn addictive numbers of women keep growing.
mm-hmm.
Um, these are things that we have to accept, and if we're going to tackle them, we need to start dealing with it with our youngest, but we need to start being able to have discussions as adults about this. And yes, it involves naked people, it involves naked people having sex, it involves the little things that we all find kinky, or that scratches my itch when it might be something different that scratches your itch, and they're both embarrassing and we don't want to talk about them. We don't have to. What we just need to recognize is this is a possibility of too much pornography leads to addiction for people. And we
Yeah,
need to be aware of that, and we need to educate them, just like we do with beer or cigarettes or anything else. And
right.
then as an educated person, you can make your own mind up.
Yeah. Well, Joshua, thank you for being on the show today. It has been a pleasure, and you definitely opened my eyes. And I truly believe that this is a topic that we really need to talk about more and more, to help other men out there that might be doing the same thing that you used to do, and doesn't realize that they have a problem, but they really do. So thank you again, and I really appreciate it. And who knows, we might do this again so we can dig into it a little bit more.
I hope we do. And I just want to let people know, if you have any questions about pornography addiction or want to get in touch with me, my website is recoveringpornaddict.com. It's got links to my books, a lot of different resources. So if you think you have a problem, or if you have a loved one with a problem, or just want to learn more, check out recoveringpornaddict.com.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joshua. And we're going to see you the next time, but I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show today. And I tell you, this has been an eye-opener for me, and I hope it has been an eye-opener for you. But if you are someone that you know, or you are looking for resources that can help you to get over whether it's porn addiction or what have you, go to the Father Show with MikeThompson.com and click on resources and get the help that you need to make a stronger man. And I hope, and I'm going to talk with Joshua to see if I can get his information on our website, because I think it's important. But thank you for joining us, and don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the show, tell somebody else about it and click that like button and then share it. But ladies and gentlemen, that's our show for today, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.